in San Diego. This time I'm not able to go to LA, so otherwise LA, San Diego, I would have met him there. So he wrote this book based on Chinese imperial historical records. And Chinese are very well known to have a systematic record of history. When the one dynasty ends, the other dynasty revises the whole history and they lay it down. Right? When the Yuan finished, the Mings came, the Ming revised the Yuan history. Just like when the Ming got finished, the Manchus, the Qings revised the history. So it's very, very well documented. They cannot argue back. So he looked at the imperial Chinese historical record. He took all these materials from the Communist Party website, all right? And it's an old Chinese, so he made it into new Chinese language. And this is not written in the form of a historical narrative. This is more an argument as to how imperial China, if you can consider the Yuan and the Qings also as Chinese dynasties, then how imperial China had not and never considered Tibet as part of China. And coming from a Chinese professor, this is a very valuable book, right? So Tibetan version has been translated by Sangye Kyab, and it was published by the Tibetan Library of Works and Archives in Dharamshala. Those who can read Tibetan, you can order from there. And the English version will come out in about 3 months' time. So Professor doesn't want any mistake because he says, I'm confronting Chinese government. So I don't want simple mistakes or silly mistakes in my book. So when you change from one format to another in computer, then the indentations go wrong. So they are manually getting everything right. So the English version, when it comes, Kumar Namjala is here, our representative in Washington, D.C. They will be working together with Professor Lau to publish this in English, and when the English version is out, some Tibetan historians say that this book, they have never seen any other book like this. This has a lot of evidence as to how Tibet was not a part of China. So here, this is the overview of Tibetan history. Now, a little overview about the Tibetan government in exile, or Central Tibetan Administration. You must be wondering, what is Sikyong? What is Sikyong's job? What kind of government we have in exile, right? So His Holiness was a visionary, always. When we came into exile in 1959, nobody thought that we would have to live in exile for so long. Everybody thought that we would go back in a short period of time, because during the 13th Dalai Lama's time, also the Chinese came to come and killed many Khampas, and they came to Lhasa in 1910. And the 13th Dalai Lama had to flee to India in 1910. But 2 years later, His Holiness the Dalai Lama returned back to Tibet because we kicked out every single Chinese from Tibet. So during the 14th Dalai Lama's time also, we thought that we will return back to Tibet in a short period of time, but it did not happen. Now we have been in exile for the last 65 years. The benevolence of His Holiness the Dalai Lama on the Tibetan people, we say, if it had not been for His Holiness the Dalai Lama coming into exile, there were very few Tibetans in Kalimpong and Darjeeling in India, and the Indian government was ready to send them back. But as soon as the Indian government found that His Holiness the Dalai Lama stepped on the Indian soil on 31st March 1959, then they didn't send the Tibetans back to Tibet. Some 80,000, 85,000 Tibetans followed His Holiness. And if it had not been for His Holiness, they would not be an exile community in the first place. We wouldn't be there, you won't be there, your parents won't be there, your grandparents would not have been able to reach India, and there would be no exile. So we'll have all of us, myself, if we are born in the same manner that we are born here, then we would still be suffering under communist China. So the very reason that we have an exile community is because of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And as His Holiness is visionary, as I said, not even 1 year after coming into exile, we were going through a lot of trouble because Tibetans, as I mentioned, Tibetan language script came from India, but we don't speak any Indian languages. So our people were illiterate, most of them, and they had no skill whatsoever. And we always lived in the mountains, right? We always lived in the mountains, and India was very hot for the Tibetans. So many of our people died because of dietary problems. So later they were put up in the foothills of Himalaya. So whenever, if you get to go back to India, you want to say, what? So if you get to go to the Himalayas in Chamba, Darjeeling, Manali, Shimla, all these places, then you should imagine that your grandparents worked on road construction, because that's the only thing we could do, hard labor. We didn't have enough education. But His Holiness introduced democracy in 1960, not even 1 year after coming into exile, because His Holiness visited China in 1954-55 when he was only about 19, 20 years old. He met with Chinese leaders like Mao Zedong, Zhou Enlai, Zhu Zhude, all that. And he found that, of course, everything looked very disciplined, but people didn't have the freedom to speak their mind. And then His Holiness was able to come to India in 1956-57, and that was just 10 years after India got independence, and it was a nascent democracy. His Holiness visited the Indian Parliament, found it very chaotic, but everybody had the freedom to speak their mind. So His Holiness appreciated democracy and introduced democracy to the exiled community. And in other countries, you find that to gain democracy, you have to sacrifice your life and you have to spend a lot of blood and sweat to get democracy. But His Holiness sometimes imposes democracy on us because he had been preparing our people over the years, right? Now, today, even an ordinary person like me, a farmer's son who grew up in a settlement working on the trees, could become Sikyong, right? So it's all because of His Holiness. So today, we have a Supreme Justice Commission, which is one part of one organ of democracy. But we don't handle criminal cases because we live in India and we have to conform to Indian laws. Just like in the United States, we Tibetans are here, but we have to conform to American laws. Otherwise, we can't exist, right? So, but our courts follow all the due processes of law, but functions more like an arbitration. And then we have a parliament of 45 members. So you have 2 members from the United States and 2 members, this is North America and South America, 2 members. Europe and Africa, 2 members. One member from outside India, Nepal and Bhutan in the Asia-Australasia region. So most of the time one Tibetan in Australia get elected because we have more than 3,000 Tibetans there. And then this parliament functions like the legislative. They frame laws for the Tibetan diaspora. So we have laws that govern us in exile. Then you have the executive. Executive meaning the Sikyong is the head, right? They're elected by Tibetans all over the world. And Sikyong is the executive head. And then under the Sikyong, we have about 292 monasteries and nunneries registered under the Religion and Culture Department. But we don't interfere in the running of monasteries because the monasteries have centuries-old institutionalized management and academic courses. So we don't interfere in that, but we do help in other matters. Then we have a department of security. Security of His Holiness the Dalai Lama is handled by the Indian government. But when His Holiness gives teachings to hundreds of thousands of people, then we send our additional security. So some of these people here are also from the security department. Some who are sitting here, they were personal security to His Holiness before coming to the United States. They have a team here, all these people who is helping, who is walking with me. They are the senior ones. They have been there for very long, serving His Holiness. So we have the security department, right? Then we have a department for home that looks after the rehabilitation of Tibetans because we are located in 39 different locations in India, in 10 different states and 2 union territories. And your parents and grandparents, most of them come from different settlements as part of the immigration program that the United States approved in 1990, right? And then we have a department for education. We run about 61 schools for about 15,000 students. Out of that, about 8,000-9,000 are Tibetans, and the rest are Himalayan and local Indian students. So we are exiled community, but we provide education to children from independent countries, from Himalayas, Nepal, Bhutan, and all that. In the monasteries also, out of the 40,000 monks, almost close to 40,000 monks and nuns, 29% are Tibetan, 69% are from the Indian Himalayas, Bhutan and Nepal, and 2% Mongols and non-Tibetan, non-Himalayan. right? And then we have a department for health. We have both allopathy in every concerned Tibetan community. We have allopathic hospitals, and we have a traditional Tibetan medicine, right? And we have a department for finance. Chile, I'll come last. Finance. Now people wonder how we get our money to run our government in exile. So this is always a constant question. This is something that Chinese government is always very interested in. But fortunately, for us, the funding for the Central Tibetan administration comes from varied sources, mainly from the Indian government, mostly for humanitarian support, education, and all that. And then the second comes from the United States. So we have to, this time we spent about 8 days in Washington, D.C. Now that the new administration is coming in, so if the appropriations for this year, now you must have heard about, do you give interest, do you spend some time on American politics? You heard about the government shutdown issues that were happening 2 days ago, right? So all these things also impact us, what the new administration. Of course, we have, because of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, we have very good friends in the Congress, both in the Senate and in the House, right? And we have good friends in the appropriations committees also, but it's not enough. We have to keep pushing, we have to keep working, because otherwise, someday you realize that the first time when President Trump came, normally before the congressional appropriations, there is the White House appropriation. And Tibet budget was 0, right? And we had to run to the hill. Why is it 0? Then the congressman was saying, don't worry, the president proposes, but the Congress disposes. So we will support you. So it continued like that, right? So even after January 20, when the new administration comes in, we have to keep working on appropriations because we received about $15 to $17 million from the United States government, and another $10 million for projects inside Tibet. So we keep continuing doing that. Then we have a lot of other governments who give small funding through non-governmental organizations. Then we have organizations, individuals who sponsor Tibetan children and all that. So our sources are very varied. We spend about 35 to 40 million US dollars every year. And the contribution from the Tibetan side is only 9%. Okay, so we are still very, very dependent. If we are spending $100 in a year, $9 come from Tibetans. $91 we still beg to governments, individuals, organizations. So if we have to become independent, so will become independent financially. Otherwise, there is no way we can become independent. You are executive of the chart, the millionaire, the billionaire of the China, and then provide this Robert China. Kazan Miji killed the China Amare. Temajaya. Who are lottery ticket? Or New York lottery. Whether the boom to get to the city could take TV like in a Sawa today in the $1 billion charity. And Kurang thing Nadula Rana, Altea, Nadula Rana, and the Lawson should to the Rora Menedi or another dictator or the Rechini. So now we are dependent. Then there is the last department, is called Department of Information and International Relations, how we try to reach out to the world. Because we have very limited human resources, we have very limited financial resources, right? So we have one office in Tokyo for East Asia and some parts of Southeast Asia. We have one office in Taipei, only for Taiwan. We have one office in Canberra for New Zealand, Australia, and some parts of Southeast Asia. We have one office in New Delhi, from Thailand to Middle East, but we are not able to go beyond India. Then we have one office in Kathmandu, only for Nepal. We have one office in Moscow. Right now, there is only one staff there because our representative cannot go back. He said something about the Ukraine war, and Putin sanctioned him, so he cannot go back. But we still keep that office, so we're waiting for this Ukraine-Russia war to get over and then take some decision after that. Then we have 3 offices in Europe, one in London, from Iceland to the whole of UK to the whole of Scandinavia. How many countries in Scandinavia? 4. Right? One. Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, this year. And 3 Baltic states. 3 Baltic states. Baltic Konyuan. Yeah. Baltics are Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia. 3 Baltic states plus Poland. So one office with just 3 people have to look after that many countries, right? And we have one office in Brussels that has to take care of Portugal, Spain, France, Benelux. 3 countries. Which are the 3 countries? Benelux, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg. Benelux, Benelux, and European Union. And we have one office in Geneva, responsible for the whole of south of Europe. Italy, Germany, all the Balkan states in Europe. Then we have one office in Sao Paulo. I was there last year, and that is responsible for the whole of Latin America. And we have only 2 people there. And our representative does not speak Portuguese, and he doesn't speak Spanish. So he needs a translator all the time, right? And then we have one office in Washington, D.C., where Kumanamjala is a representative today, with 5 staff there, including himself, and 1 person responsible for coordination with the Tibetan communities, because U.S., United States, we have, in the whole of North America, we have 36 Tibetan associations. Right, including 1 yours, and yours is the 3rd largest or the 2nd largest after New York in the United States. But if you take Toronto into consideration, then you may be the 3rd or the 4th. Right? So Tibetan, the largest number are in New York, the 2nd one is in Toronto. Minnesota claimed to have about 5,000, but they don't have the exact numbers. Even here, your president last night was reporting that when we tell people, there are 1,945 people who pay the voluntary tax that we collect, right? And then he tells others that we have between 3,000 to 5,000. So 3,000 to 5,000, that's a lot of difference, or 60%, 70%. More. So we don't have an exact number. So yesterday also we were discussing, I was imploring them to get a demographic number. It's very important, when we have to reach out to the state governments, or we have to reach out to institutions for support for the school or for any other projects that the Tibetan community here in Northern California wants to do, then we have to give them numbers. If we don't have numbers, then if you say 5,000, you will be lying. Right? And as a Buddhist, you cannot lie, right? So, for this project, I think you all can play a very important role. If we can segregate into blocks here in Bay Area where Tibetans live, and then if you get some elders, and then you can go and ask them the numbers, then we get a number, exact number as to how many Tibetans are here in Bay Area. And you can help the community leaders to do that. And you will also gain some insight about the Tibetan community here in Northern California. So that is how we try to reach out. And we have an election commission. We conduct election in 1 day all over the world for the position of Sikyong and for the position of members of parliament. So the whole world wonders how we conduct this. Because nobody has that kind of a scale, from some 27 different countries, from Japan, New Zealand, Australia, and all those countries to the United States, Europe and the United States. So we conduct election in 1 day all over the world, which is exemplary for many other communities. They can't even imagine that we can do that. So last time I was in Switzerland, and the Zurich Council President, Mr. Mayok, said, I told him now we have about 600 civil servants at the central level, and then about 400 working under the Department of Health and Home to get 3 years. And I've never seen any other exiled community like this community, right? And it's all because of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So we should feel this gratitude to His Holiness for His benevolence in empowering the Tibetans to carry on the responsibility that we need to carry. And one of my jobs is to prepare the younger generation. if I fail or if we fail in our duty to prepare this generation for future leadership, then we would be failing in our duties, right? And you would be failing in your duties if you don't manage to take up the responsibility. Wow. I say I come here to motivate you, right, to take up future leadership. And when you come in so much numbers in attendance and show your interest, then we feel the inspired child. Oh, I gave my mind, I kept to myself. So, who will take the responsibility? Tibet support group, Tibet support group, if we don't take the lead, then what will we do with Tibet support groups? 여러분이 도지거리는 때는데 그미디 두거리는 때는데 간조 빨라 아만 좀 미직동날 레벨 열에 제를 내려 열에 가림베네 아무리가 중기 로고치한 상으로 여름 철다니 여기 내는 거라 변화로 민주 갈래게 나왔다니 행가서로 디 트리트먼트 라게 열와 He is we all should never forget our gratitude to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I never do. And we should listen to His Holiness more and more. 소소소 미지게를 팽그래 내주 추주슈들의 그런 별집을 예임바와 도지체 신수의 향수.
So, Kumocho Tujena, thank you so much, Kumo Sikyong, for the wonderful and in-depth talk on Tibetan history and matters related to Tibet, and also giving us a brief introduction on Central Tibetan administration. Before I open the floor for questions, I just wanted to assure Kumo Sikyong that since Michael Wenwal Prague, since he's here, as personally I work for a law school, and also because I'm a principal of Namche Kyesa, we'll keep him busy. We'll invite him to our school as often as possible. And then also he has donated his library, so many books to Tank, which will open, obviously open to public pretty soon. So with those words, I would like to open the floor for some questions. I know some of you have already prepared some questions. Kusala, Janla, I'll pass the mic around and.
30 seconds.
Please.
Como sigo chong testele naming what is kusanyen and in a tari ne tiwa injinata. So as Tibetans who were born and raised in America, what can we do to help preserve our culture?
The cultural preservation, I think, is through the Sunday school. Now, one thing, Hagar, Hagar is a concept that was developed in Tibet. Because since Tibetans inside Tibet are deprived of their rights to preserve their identity, they came up with this innovative idea that every Wednesday we will eat only Tibetan food, we will wear only Tibetan dress, we will speak only Tibetan language, and we will practice Buddhism on this day to preserve our identity, right? So this concept was adopted by the Tibetans in exile, but it became only dance and cultural programs. So not so much about speaking. 하갈 현재 시에타고 하는 samala 그게 지구 잡라는 계속 강에 되어와. 오늘 저는 하갈 시에 지구 타외만 봐. 기에게 그게 잡고 가래. 이 제베나 아주 그게. So one thing I forgot to mention about the Tibetan language, because the script came from India, and Tibetan language, as per one Tibetan scholar who is based in France now, his name is Nicolas, and he can speak Khamba, he can speak Amdo, he can speak Izangke. No Tibetan can speak all the three languages of dialects of the three provinces, right? But a foreigner, a Frenchman, can speak Amdoke, Khambake, Uzanke, and all that. So he is a linguist, and he says that Tibetan language is one among the 15 most oldest languages in this world, with more than 1,000 years of history. So you can see Tibetan script was invented in 7th century. So he says that there are about 76 family of languages in Tibet. This, of course, some Tibetan experts don't agree. They say that we have only one language. But then he also says that there are 305 dialects in Tibet. This is and Geshe Melam, I don't know how many of you have heard of Geshe Melam. So next time when Melam comes here, he's a monk who came from Tibet. When he was 7 years old, he used to draw. And he's good in drawing also. And he bought a computer when he was a monk in Sierra. And he knew only how to put it on. He never learned computers. And he broke open the computer, built it back, he played with 0 and 1, and he invented a digital Tibetan script called Nuna script, which is widely used by Tibetans in exile and also Tibetans inside Tibet. It's a huge competition to digital scripts developed by Tibetans inside Tibet with the Chinese government. So this time, when we were there in Washington, D.C., if you have seen, then he had worked on a Tibetan dictionary for 6 years with some 300 scholars, and came out with this Tibetan dictionary of how many volumes? Can you imagine? Can you guess how many volumes of Tibetan dictionary? 20, 30, more, 50? This is like an auction going on. It's 223 volumes of books, hard copy. And of course, it's available in soft copy as well. So you can imagine a Tibetan language dictionary, Tibetan to Tibetan dictionary is 223 volumes. Last year, I was in Czech Republic. Geshe Melam had already discussed with the Czech government, and he contributed 223 volumes to the Czech National Library. And this year, on 12th of this month, he contributed 223 volumes to the Library of Congress in the United States. So the collection of Tibetan literature in the Library of Congress started way back in 1900. I told you about Woodville Rockhill. He brought 110 volumes of Dege Kanyu. So Dege Kanyu means Kanyu is the teachings of the Buddha, but it was printed in Dege, in Kham. So he brought 110 copies of that and presented in the library. Today, the Library of Congress in the United States has more than 21,000 titles in Tibetan. So if you want to study Tibetan literature, it's all here in the United States, right? So it's all because of the work of one person called Gene Smith. He was a follower of Neshung Rinpoche, who came to the United States in Seattle in 1960, invited by the Washington University, and he became a consultant there. So you can imagine 223 volumes. It's a record. No other languages has such a dictionary. And that also is a pointer to the fact as to how important Tibetan language is, right? So the root of or the basis of our identity lies in the language. And that is why today I was very encouraged when Principal Therla and all the teachers took us to all the classes, and even the smaller ones were doing very well. It's like going to a school in India. Even though you have only few hours to study on every Sunday, I think you are doing very well. If our expectation is too much, if we have over expectation, then we land up in disappointment. Even in India, you have studied Tibetan throughout the year, but after you finish your high school, then some are not even able to write good letters, right? But here, with the help of all the teachers here, and I always remain indebted to all the teachers because they are responsible for shaping you to make you into a Tibetan. So language is very important, first thing. And then this information I gave you, these are very basic information. I can talk for hours and hours about global politics. I can talk for hours on what is happening inside China. We can talk for hours on what's happening inside Tibet. So based on these issues, then we have to decide how strategically we need to move. Because right now, the global political situation is like a tsunami. It's going up, down, you're talking about bipolar world, you're talking about multipolar world, there are a lot of coalitions happening, and so many things happening. Now we have to see how good swimmer are we. If we are good swimmers, we can survive the tsunami. If we are not good swimmers, then we will. So the but it's one extension of Tibetan culture. Right? But to work for Tibet, you have to understand the basics of Tibet. You have to understand, you have to feel proud of being a Tibetan. Because we have a civilization, we have a culture that's based in non-violence. I have not gone through all those literatures that the monks study. Monks spend all their life studying these literatures. I have not studied, but still listening to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, listening to the High Lamas, that gives you a lot of wisdom to handle your day-to-day life also. I call those the nuggets of wisdom, nuggets of Buddhist wisdom. So like just one example, there is the mental inclination, disposition of every single human being. So today in society, when there are differences of opinion, then you tend to not, get overwhelmed by so many different kinds of opinion. But that's natural, And you go around the world, 8 billion people. You will not find, physically, you will not find a person like him among all these 8 billion people. Exactly similar like him in height, hair, whatever, right? Even twins who are born just few seconds after one another. I have 3 twins. My 6 sisters have 3 twins. So they are born a few seconds after another, or 1-2 minutes after another. And they spend all their life together, but still they don't have the same mentality, right? So just like we have difference of 8 billion physical features, there are 8 billion mental features, difference. Right? So everybody is entitled to their opinion, because your mind is shaped from your birth, and if you are Buddhist, then it goes back to your previous life also. So at least in this life, where you are born, to whom you are born, to which school you go, to friends that you befriend, and the community that you live in, everything shapes your mind. How that is going to impact Tibet. And then you look at the global situation. One reason why I could not stay in Dharamsala for the 10th December celebration and come to the United States is also we were waiting for the US elections to get over. The whole world watches the United States, because the United States is the most powerful country in this world, right? So every country studies their, what could be the changes when a new administration comes in. So even we have to study that, right? So this time we met with a lot of leaders at the Hill. We met with the Foreign Office in the administration. Then we met think tanks. We met many other people. It's not enough to just watch news, because news is very momentary, right? And if something is happening, you have to look at the whole issue from different perspectives, a holistic perspective. Don't look at it from a very narrow-minded point of view. If you can look at different perspectives, then you will develop a more holistic approach on how to resolve this conflict. So we are an exile community, and we have to see whether we can put a hand in, or a leg in, or a head in, or a whole body in. So we have to always look for opportunities and challenges, right? And future also, we'll need to study as to what could happen to China in future. So under every different scenario, then we look at different opportunities, different challenges. So if we know this right now, then we know exactly when that thing happens, we are prepared. We are ready to take that opportunity. If we are not prepared, then again you have to, go back to the drawing room and start working on it. By that time, that opportunity might have evaporated. Sometimes it could be a very small window of opportunity. Sometimes it could be longer. So we have to learn to adapt our situation with the developing or evolving dynamism and fluidity of international politics and its relation with China. So a lot of our course will depend on US-China relations. You know, President Trump is talking about 60% tariff on all imports from China. Whether he will do that or not is something to how the new administration is going to harmonize all the paradoxes that we see. So, yeah, it'll be a challenge. It's interesting times. And we are also playing a small role in this global politics by reaching out to governments, pushing our case, explaining to governments and advocate and see how we can gain traction. Now, of course, we got this Resolve Tibet Act passed. Are you all aware of this, right? President Biden signed a law into an act, a bill into an act on July 12th of this year. And this talks about 4 main issues. One, Chinese government says there is no Tibet problem. They say Tibet is a socialist paradise, but they don't allow people to see the paradise by themselves. And I tell the international community that people don't burn themselves to death in paradise, right? 157 Tibetans self-immolated from 2009 to 2022. And most of them are between the age of 17 to 34, which means they have never witnessed independent Tibet. They have never witnessed the 10 long years of cultural revolution in China where they destroyed everything old. They destroyed 6,000 Tibetan monasteries in Tibet. As a result of Chinese occupation, directly or indirectly, about 1.2 million Tibetans died. Right? So these people have not seen this. They see only what the Chinese government is doing to Tibet and Tibetans today. And they are driven to this self-desperation, to this state of desperation to burn themselves, hoping against hope that the Chinese government will pay some attention to their plight, or hoping against hope that the international community will come to their rescue. But unfortunately, we have not received so much attention or traction from the international community. And international community, oh, Tibet issue is dead now, nobody cares. The Uyghur issue has become stronger, Hong Kong has become stronger. And I tell the Uyghurs in Hong Kong, it's not a competition between Hong Kongers and Uyghurs and Tibetans and Mongols and Manchus, right? As long as the perpetrator is the same, it reflects the same on the international community. So, first we have to become aware, as much as possible. Tibetan history, one anecdote I keep repeating, that when I started working at Tibetan Parliamentary and Policy Research in New Delhi, from that time we started focusing on youth, right? That is why my interest in empowering the youth comes from there. And one time we invited Professor Samdong Rinpoche to speak to the youth about the responsibility of the Tibetan youth towards the Tibetan cause, just like your question. Then Rinpoche spoke for 1 hour. He said nothing about your responsibilities. He explained 2 words. One word, lenge in Tibetan, which is equivalent to responsibility, and the meaning of responsibility in English. So the Tibetan word lenge, when you say it has to come from within you about your responsibility. No one should be telling you what your responsibility is. It has to come from within you. Now, if you look at the English word, responsibility originates from response. Response is when somebody tells you to do something, then you respond, right? So the usage of word itself reflects the mentality behind the usage of that word. So Professor Samdong Rinpoche concluded by saying, I'm a Tibetan, you're a Tibetan, and nobody told me what my responsibility was. So I'm nobody to tell you what your responsibility is. So you have to think yourself whether you have a responsibility or not to carry forward the Tibetan Shaka. Very powerful statement coming from somewhere.
I think it will be helpful if you have any questions.
I will take 3 questions at one time. Yeah. Please.
Tibet Sikyong Penpa Tsering la yiming umaten the chulani aninga lokjala ISFT chapter service ISFT Berkeley highway. Tanga karila changi di changma Berkeley ninga toimendo achininga integrate la. My first question is about hydropower electric dams in Tibet. I understand that hydropower electric dams are harmful as they displace Tibetan communities, kill Tibetans, and destroy Tibetan agriculture. But I also understand that modernization is needed everywhere and that Tibet is in need of a power source for electricity. So I'm wondering if or how Tibet can implement a power source of electricity without being as harmful.
How Tibet can?
Implement a way for electricity causing harm.
What's your second question? Do you have a second question?
Yeah. Actually, I want.
Okay, it's on. Thank you.
Hi, Darshana, I'm Chisong. I have a quick question, more of like your response to this take. I went to a talk last year and a professor at Columbia more or less said that like Tibet wouldn't be free or reach autonomy unless the communist regime collapses. I was wondering, like, do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? Like, what's your take on that?
So my question is this. So me personally, I think one of my greatest concerns is the continuation of the Tibetan Sunday schools, especially within exile. So whether that's in the United States or in Canada, I think that just as each subsequent generation goes on, we see a little bit of our diminishing culture and our language. So I was just wondering, what exactly is the CTA? Because I know that you mentioned the Department of Education, and I believe I did get to talk a little bit with the Department of Education minister, but I didn't really get a clear answer as to like what exactly the CTA was doing in support of the Tibetan communities and specifically the Sunday schools here. Just because I'm truly like a firm believer in education as a means of liberation, and so I was just wondering what the role of the CTA was in that.
Thank you.
아무도 이것이 NDGL이나 아니 가족 통동 수야 배전 시간 출시가 스타트 요말 봐. 근데 SFT 기 chapter나 찰나의 송으로 아까 단답달라. At one time, we used to have so many SFT chapters around the United States. We're talking about 500 chapters in the whole of the United States. Now it has dwindled down to SFT chapters run only by Tibetan students. There are not many foreign students. You have to involve more non-Tibetan students in SFT movement. If it is only Tibetan, then there are so many other avenues. Why do we need so many different identities, pushing different agenda? So that could confuse many other people. So those days, of course, at the height of Tibet awareness in the United States, where you have the Beastie Boys and you have Hollywood and everything, and Beastie Boys performed all over the United States, they made money, and that was contributed to starting a lot of SFT schools, SFT chapters around many universities and schools. And now that we are more Tibetan students in different schools, the re-establishment of SFT chapters are very, very important for creating awareness on Tibet in the campuses and also in the academia. So your question was on hydropower. Hydropower in Tibet is not meant only for Tibetans. The larger hydropower output goes to Eastern China to feed all the industries that needs electricity to produce, and China is named as the factory of the world. So they need electricity, and they are using Tibet's transferring of Western hydropower to Eastern cities. That is the whole project. That is what the whole project is all about. It's not for the benefit of Tibetans. And you're coming to specifically your question to Chinese government, because all these hydropower electricity projects were taken up by the provincial governments. And they don't care about environmental concerns or about Tibetans or the social impact of these developmental projects. So environmental and social impact, they don't even allow people, when the people come in to study Tibet's climatic conditions and all that, they don't allow these people to move and understand the social impact. right? So any developmental work that is taken, because Chinese government keeps saying, oh, your Sikyong goes around the world and talks about all the bad things that we are doing, but he's not talking about all the developmental work that we have undertaken in China. Unfortunately, Chinese are very unidimensional in their approach. They think that any solution to any problem is development, 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 development. They don't see anything beyond that. So they think that if they build hydropower, the roads and railways and aeroplanes, the airports and all that, they think they did a lot of for Tibet. But development for whom? It's more to take Tibet's resources out of Tibet to China. It's not meant only for Tibetans. You build all these highways. Now they have a lot of projects. They have projects to build 35 airports in Tibet by 2030, 2035. Yeah? They have mega dams, many infrastructure and all that. But is it going to generate with the, okay, I'll stop here. But then so we have to ask Chinese government to do environmental impact assessments before they take up any developmental project, right? Now, even now they say, according to some estimates, out of all the hydroelectric power they are building on the upper reaches of Yangtze, they are going to produce more power from solar plants in Tibet, right? And solar plants, when you build solar plants, of course, it's very nice to say we have renewable energy, solar plants for good for environment and all that. But when you talk about these mega solar plants in different parts of Tibet, then all the area under those solar plants, how much impact it will have on ground, that nobody has done any assessment of the environmental impact of those. Those also need to be done, but we are not allowed. We don't have access to do all that. So the main issue is when you go reach out to environmentalists, tell them that Chinese are doing a lot of development work, but they don't do proper environmental impact assessment. And this needs to be done. And allow environmental scientists from different parts of the world to visit Tibet, because Tibet is the third pole. It has impacts, not only on Tibet, but over the region and the whole world. Columbia University, the free. You have to distinguish between these two words, freedom and independence, right? Independence is sovereignty. Freedom could be anything, religious freedom, linguistic freedom, all that. But when you talk politics, you have to be very specific in the words that you use, because it means different things and it may have different connotations to different people who listen to you. So, independence, of course, we have the right to seek independence because historically we were an independent state. So any Tibetan who espouses independence, they have the right. But then again, the question is it practical? Is it a pragmatic approach or not? Is it something that can be achieved or not? Now, how do you achieve independence? That's the whole question, right? And we are up against an opponent like China. We don't even like to call China enemy, we call opponent. So you have 1.4 billion Chinese with more than 2 million Chinese army. And Tibet is only 7 million. We are huge, but we are spread across this 2.5 million square kilometers of land, right? So how do you can you fight with the Chinese? Can the Tibetans fight and win independence from Chinese? Difficult, right? Then do you expect NATO or the Indian army to send army to fight on behalf of the Tibetans against the Chinese? Difficult. So if this cannot be done, then how do you achieve independence? That is the whole problem. Okay? Then autonomy, at least it gives space because of autonomy, because of middle way. Because of middle way, the leader who followed Mao Zedong, that was Deng Xiaoping, who ruled China from 76 onwards, he met with His Holiness Elder Brother and said that aside from independence, we can talk about everything else. So this opened the way for us to send several fact-finding delegations in the early 80s into Tibet. In 82 and 84, we also sent 2 teams to explore possible negotiations. Right? So this gives us little space to reach out to the international community also. If we talk about Tibetan independence, there may be few leaders who say, okay, Tibetans need independence, Tibetans deserve independence, but anybody in the government don't support that. Right? So it will be very difficult for us to reach to governments also if we espouse for independence. So middle way provides a lot more space and a lot more opportunity. Because of middle way, some of your parents who came from Tibet, like Jigrila here, he who was part of the 1987 demonstration, if you listen to him, one day you should listen to his story. When I heard his story, it's like a movie. You feel like you're making a movie out of that, because he was a monk at that time. The bullets were whizzing past his ears and all that. He has a very interesting story to tell. So, middle way, as I mentioned, His Holiness appreciates the concept of European Union. So every one of us have to live to. It's a small world. Only 8 billion people, right? And so why not we live in peace with each other? Why is Putin and Kim Jong-un and all these people, Xi Jinping, I don't understand their mentality. What are they trying to do? Russia can create a new Ukraine. If you consider all the amount of money they are spending to invade Ukraine, Russia is so big, they can create another Ukraine. Why they have to create another? Why they have to invade Ukraine? They have a lot of land. And for that matter, China also. They are claiming Taiwan is part of what? No, what do they do with Taiwan? Is a small island. China is very big. But still Xi Jinping keeps all these hegemonistic ambitions in the region. Why? What do you do with all this? Why can't you let the Taiwanese people live in peace with themselves? So these are very, very, and power corrupts and absolute power corrupts.
Absolutely. Corrupts absolutely.
Absolute power corrupts absolutely. You get mad because of all the powers. There's a better chance of getting autonomy. Of course, autonomy is not defined under international law, but there are a lot of practicing autonomies around the world. So we saw, even in the United States also, you have associated states. In Canada, you have Quebec, right? The Nunavut people. Then in England, you have Scotland, that is in Denmark, you have Greenland as the autonomous state, and then you have Åland Island as part of the Finnish autonomy. Spain now Basque, Barcelona, the autonomous state. Under Italy, you have South Tyrol and many other autonomous states. They autonomous Mangu study here. So if the central government and the state government can work out an agreement that's both beneficial to both, then it works. And we all can live in peace with each other instead of fighting. Right? When you talk about self-determination, then you're talking about plebiscite, involvement of United Nations, monitoring referendum. Then the host country should also allow for such a referendum. But will China allow that? It's very difficult. But self-determination allows for any kind of opening. You can go for independence, you can go for if there are possibilities for plebiscite and a referendum, then self-determination is definitely a better option. But even people in the free world don't practice that. Sunday school, we are a refugee community. We are in exile, right? So most of our service delivery goes to Tibetans in India and Nepal. We cannot reach out to Bhutan. So right now, the situation is improving, but we still need to take care of the Tibetans in India and Nepal. That is where all our funding goes there, and we look after that. Now this year we were looking for Namjila, and we were working with the Senate appropriators to find out whether we can keep some amount for the diaspora community elsewhere. And now that you are in a country like United States, and if you have one good person as a fundraiser, in fact, your principal is a very good person to write grants and seek grants and all that. If we can have one professional to work in the office of Tibet, if his or her salary can be paid by the Tibetan communities in North America, that person will make more money than his or her own salary, right? So America has a lot of openings. There are a lot of institutions, organizations. You have to know the right gate to enter into. Then you know there will be a lot of resources. So in the problem is time. Because when you are in school, you have your regular classes, you have, when you get into high school, junior high and all that, then you have a lot more things on your head that you don't have too much time for Tibetan classes. So one option is for you to study in a Tibetan school in India. It's like my daughter, when she came to the United States, when I was posted here, she studied up to grade 8 in India. So now she can speak good Tibetan. All that, the formative years, very crucial for those kind of things. So if you cannot go to India, then the TCV, Tibetan Children's Village, has designated the lower TCV as school for children coming from outside India to study there. But this year there were only 5 new admissions. It's not enough to run a school with 5 students. So they had to stop that and put the 5 students in upper TCV to study with other students. But in future, if there are more students, we will have to work towards getting facilities for you in India. Now, the other option is to start schools here in the United States. So the Tibetan community, there is one person called Tarala, who is in Minnesota. There are quite a number of Tibetans. And the former Kazangawa, a former president of the Tibetan community of Minnesota, and some foreigners, they have come together to start a charter school for Tibetans in Minnesota. Okay, so this is going to be the first. And hopefully they can start the school by 1st September this year. And if they can do that, then this will set an example for other Tibetan communities to start similar schools. Then you can learn from Minnesota experience and see whether you can start a charter school here. And Tibetans in Minnesota are also working on a Tibet Town project. So in India and Nepal, we are all located in compact communities, except for places like Kamdok, Kalimpong, which are scattered communities. So because of those compact communities, we have been able to preserve our language, our culture, our religion and crafts and arts and all that. And now those communities are getting scattered because younger generations are moving out. So you are all born here. Otherwise, you would have been born in India. Those who are born here, right? They are planning on a Tibet Town project to accommodate about 300 families. And within that 80 acres, if they can move the charter school also there, then you will have a Tibetan environment for very small children. So they grow up in the Tibetan community, speak Tibetan language, imbibe Tibetan culture and all that. So these are some new initiatives that are coming. Our community is also evolving. We are going through a lot of social and demographic change, and we have to adapt accordingly. If we are not able to adapt, then as you say, we will land up in big trouble in future, right? So thank you.
That's it.
Who? Marbe, Chair Marbe. Arba.
Mare.
Okay, I'm going to Chair Marana. I'm going to go Marwa, telling us you want to mother. Okay. 우메남기 룸드디 당행에 라브나 신신이 다 단답도 첩식이 룸드디 되지 투영을 쓰는 것도 똑똑 돼요 말에 제가 여름 책이 우메남기 공부 수원의 제니 왜 나오는 용의 그건 수대 투에 되게 계속 고쳐버려 와 이마도 지기 80s, 90s, 2000s, at one time we used to receive between 2,500 to 3,000 Tibetans every year. Mostly young kids left here in India to study, not knowing whether they will ever meet their families again or not. today chidu sambala ani kenzu chu yong thue de umelam gi kadina tene de ngazo rangze rang la de ne kemi ko jamni shagre ani nepal ne chu yong thu mare 제가 단다 표현에 주 enjoy 나눠라 예수 게스탄바 꾸준하로 이동 대화를 용투에디 오면은 기까지는 때네 영화 팀에나 아니 표현에 미사와 용투에 백하고를 있잖아 담부시고 시기를 봐 도시네 알레 담부 춘자로 시험이네 되게요 아니 오면은 기 시주디고 원에 있잖아기 미망고치레 고도야고 빼요 Chinese intellectuals 나눠라 근데 단다 되는 시기만 여러분이 지금 나한테 삼아 당고 개미부고 되게 권유 제가 쉬려도 콘서트 설계래 신앙식이래. But when His Holiness starts speaking about what he meant by his middle way, and 콘서트 open up chart 와. Oh, Dalai Lama is not the same as the Chinese government is portray him to be. Sometimes I ask this question. His Holiness is chanting Umelam like a mantra, and the Chinese government keeps calling him as a separatist. So I keep telling them, who wants Tibet to be separated from China? Is it His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who's always asking for autonomy, or the Chinese government who keeps calling His Holiness a separatist? 가대버려, 랍디가. 이 사람이야, 우메람기 돈에 나주 삼로 가리 요거지. 나주 우마스디 가데시기요. 이게디 야나 쇼는 밥 걷다 뛰어야. 그래서 이동 주거든 아주 깨져 시험을 와. 여름 제다 계산이 안 된다. 그 신제 그 시험을 가지고 걷다 뛰어야. Now it all depends on whether the Chinese leadership has the political will to resolve the Sino-Tibet conflict or not. There is nothing wrong with the Umelam because Umelam is seeking a negotiated solution that will be, that will contribute towards more peace and stability in the whole region. So Umelam ki dumde tenshao mangbuyore Ume Tibet kodo beare gejijido na panyo tuere. Ume Malaysia beare gejijido na nyok tuere kabore. Tandangandu resolve Tibet Act and zuge yong tuere pe kabore. Because we have that space to reach out. If there is no space, then right now, the effort of this 16th cabinet is to take everybody along, whether you are espousing independence or whether you are espousing middle way. If you have to seek independence for a future, then you have to prove the independence of Tibet in the past, which the independence seekers also should be doing. So through middle way, to gain value for middle way, we are talking about acceptance of this polarity. One polarity is the historical status of Tibet. So we can go together. Now, a stage might come where things will evolve, where things will change, where we may have different opportunities. Then we have to reevaluate our situation and see what is best, for Tibet and Tibetan people. So you have to understand all this. I say His Holiness started thinking about Umelam since 1973. And when I say 1973, you have to understand what was going on in Tibet. The 10 long years of cultural revolution where they were destroying everything in Tibet, everything old. They disrobed the monks. They let the Tibetans walk over scriptures. China also became part of United Nations because of United States. Right? So if you find the time, you read this book, Kissinger on China. Right? Kissinger opened the world, opened China to the world, and then President Nixon went to China, and then Taiwan was kicked out of United Nations, and China came in as one of the 5 Security Council members in 1971. 아니 cannot chair to normal if you are in His Holiness place, how would you place yourself? How will you think? Because at that time the crisis was to maintain the identity of the Tibetans. Right? Whether we get independent, even if we get independence, it doesn't make sense. He is about Pebek more Sungok chair, Chedu, and Yawm Umelam Gomashe, and somebody in Shabbat, Yabu there, if you understand the reason and the logic behind why His Holiness went for middle way, and then try to understand the global situation, even today, right? Even today, and America, Kazan Yeja, Biden, the Sai, and result Tibet Act, the Sharman Shaba, Jacob Suchi, another Moneshimava. Tinjik Nedang and Samotan, and another Langa, what was at the Tabar. Langa got the usually Chandigan of Utu can go to Dana, so go Naire Mother Jiggy, part of Saragamara. Langa is head we are. Langa is saying Shuma, broad Chana, and ya, Cock of Sabbath and the Yonsi, tired. Okay. Tushana. And thanks for inspiring us.
About Tibetan, we have to study about Tibet. There's no two ways about it. If you want to call yourselves responsible Tibetan, then we can be more responsible and can be more meaningful with whatever we do. That's the message that I would that I received from Sikyong's talk. And thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.